If we take a look at the NPM download statistics of the common end-to-end frameworks, then we see that Cypress is the dominating number one by quite some margin. If we take a look at the growth rate, then we still can say over the last 2 years Cypress has doubled, which is wonderful. But there is another framework which didn't just have a growth rate of 200%, but of 600%, and that's Playwright. Playwright at the moment, again, absolute numbers, compared to Cypress is a third or a fourth, but we can already say that it's catching up quite quickly. And many companies these days ask themselves if they should switch from Cypress to Playwright, or if they start with a new application, if they should just go with Playwright right away. In this video, I want to help you making the right decision. I'm going to compare these two frameworks by different categories. So we'll first start with technological approach, then with the developer experience, the CI, the coding, the architecture extensibility, and then last but not least, the miscellaneous features. And at the very end, of course, the summary and my own opinion. Who am I? So my name is Rein Hanekamp. I'm part of Angular Architects. We are providing a lot of trainings, consulting, obviously in the area of Angular, also in Java meantime, but also in testing, end-to-end testing, and there especially Cypress and Playwright. Let's start. So let's start with the technological approach. Once upon a time there was an end-to-end framework with the name Selenium, and it was based on a technology called WebDriver. And the way how it worked in those days was that we wrote our tests, and for every specific browser there was a certain adapter, a WebDriver. So our test code was translated by the WebDriver so that the specific browser could understand it. Selenium gave us the possibility to write a test and test multiple browsers at once, but it had one huge problem, and this was the flakiness. So this is an unreliability, and we couldn't trust our tests anymore. This became even worse when the single page applications appeared, because before that, whenever we did some kind of an action, the page reloaded itself. So it was very easy for WebDriver to know when the next action could be dispatched or when it could continue. But with single page applications, that was not the thing anymore, because when I click on a button, the page doesn't reload itself. I don't even know what it does. It could be the case that one or multiple requests happen. It can also be the case that multiple times the DOM is re-rendered. We just don't know when the application is ready for the next step. And then all along came a new set of end-to-end frameworks where now Playwright and Cypress are part of it. And those new frameworks, they said, okay, maybe we don't want to go with WebDriver because we are missing quite a lot of information what's going on in the browser. We focus only on the Chromium-based browser, and we are using the Chrome DevTools protocol, CDB. And these frameworks are based on that particular protocol, which again gave our framework enough information in order to come up with very stable tests. These frameworks, they also do something in addition to bring in the stability, but let's just keep it like this, saying that the CDP, this kind of protocol, has way more information to offer than WebDriver. The difference between Cypress and Playwright, because they're using both CDB, is that Playwright runs our tests outside of the browser. So our test code is actually again translated into CDB, and then we can remotely control our browser with it. On the other side, Cypress is doing it a little bit different. It's a kind of a hybrid approach, because Cypress takes our test code, most parts of it, and injects the test code as it is directly in the browser where it runs. So you might have heard this already, but I think it's important, or it would be a good thing if we see CDB in action, because this is something what doesn't happen quite often. What we have to do in order to make this working, we need to start Chrome. So I have here already this command, so we need to say our own user data here. Then I say remote debugging port 9222, And from now on, a new browser pops up. This is a completely new Chrome session, and it gives us access to remotely control it via the port 9222. So what this means is that I can use any other browser that I want. I just say 9222 on localhost, and we see right here the information coming from this other Chromium that I've just started. And if I would now say, okay, I'm going now to navigate somewhere, let's say the Austrian news channel, and I reload it here, then we see that the information has been updated. So I'm getting already quite a lot of information out of my browser, but I can also actively control it. And I have already prepared a snippet for that. So what we get is that the browser, when we enable the debugging port, that it opens a WebSocket connection. So we can connect to that WebSocket, and then we can, as we see it, for example, here, send different commands to it. And in this case, we say that we want to navigate to localhost 4200, and the method in this case is page navigate. This is done via the WebSocket connection. The WebSocket connection, by the way, is always here in the terminal, so I need to copy it because it's always different. Oop. I can paste it here, and if I now run it, and let me make this a little bit smaller and go back to my browser, and if I now execute this script, then we see that this browser is now executing those commands that we send to it and is navigating to the application that we actually want to test. So this is actually what Playwright's doing. All our test code that we see is translated in one of these kind of commands here. So this is we get more or less full control over the browser. We can do whatever we want. With Cypress it's different, because we can make it very easily when we write a test in Cypress and we say, for example, we want to select an element which has a data test ID attribute, button customers, coincidence, that's that button here, and we want to click on it. And Cypress is doing almost nothing else than just saying here, okay, I have a document. Let me make this a little bit larger. Document query selector. I say here data test ID equals button customers. Then I just say I want to click on it. And this is what Cypress is doing. It is injecting our test code as JavaScript into the browser, and there is it executed. So if I say I want to click on it, then we see that my application is reacting to it because it received the click event. Good. So these are the two differences. Here again, we see it's not really that Cypress is directly injecting our testing code into the running application. It goes via two iframes. So Cypress starts the browser, of course, via CDB. That is a manipulated browser, manipulated environment. So it's not just like injecting, but in the end, the test runner calls our application via a certain, or embeds our application into an iframe. And then there is a second iframe where the test code is executed. Both come from the same origin, and then the test code communicates with the application via these iframes. That's the way how it works. So in terms of browser support, I said before, they're both running on CDB, which means we have support for the Chromium family. We support Chrome, of course, Chromium, Edge, Opera, but they also have support for Firefox. Because Firefox provides CDB natively, so out of the box, Firefox provided their own kind of connection to CDB. And this is something that Playwright came up with. Support for Safari. We have to be a little bit careful if we say Safari, but Playwright wanted to give us a support for Safari. And since Safari does not work on Linux or on Windows, Playwright said, okay, let's take the engine of Safari, which is WebKit, that's open source, and that runs on every operating system. And let's build a browser around this WebKit engine, and let's make this browser so that it can accept CDP, or that it understands the CDP itself, which means then we can also control it via CDP. And this is the way how the WebKit version of Playwright works. You can also call it the Playwright WebKit browser. And because it understands CDP, Cypress took it as well and said, okay, we are taking the Playwright WebKit browser, it understands CDP, and then we can also provide it. In terms of programming languages, it's a little bit different. It's obvious Cypress JavaScript code is injected in the browser, so there is just JavaScript that we can execute. So we write our test in Java or in TypeScript. JavaScript or TypeScript, not Java. In Playwright, it's a different story. Test code runs outside of the browser. It's just a WebSocket connection. And it provides bindings for JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, .NET, and also Java. So much more variety when it comes to Playwright. I said before that both frameworks do something in order to improve the stability, to avoid flakiness. How do they do it? With Playwright, we have a certain feature built in, which is called the auto-wait feature. So whenever we select an element in Playwright, and of course it waits until it appears in the DOM, but then it is executing a lot of actions, or it runs a lot of checks just to make sure that the element is ready for the action. So if we say click, or if we want to do an input, if we want to set a value to an input field, then Playwright is internally running checks before it starts with that particular action. That's very safe. Cypress is doing the same. Cypress, it's not called auto-wait, but it's called actionability. Cypress also waits until the element appears in the DOM, and then it runs a list of checks against the DOM element, and if they all turn green, only then does it execute the actual action. So this brings the stability in both frameworks. So that's usually not an issue. Dependencies. There is a different mindset between these two frameworks when it comes to dependencies. Playwright says when you install Playwright, you just install Playwright and nothing else. We don't have any, we try to minimize the dependencies that we have. Also in terms of new features. When Playwright says we want to provide a new feature, then they don't rely so much on the community or on third-party extensions. They say we try to build everything on our own. So the selection mechanism, the assertions, everything is done by Playwright itself. And this is an advantage and of course also a disadvantage, because Cypress is doing the opposite. When you do everything on your own, of course you have full responsibility. So when something breaks, you can fix it. You are not depending on somebody else. On the other side, you don't have that much resources to provide a huge range of functionality, obviously. But then, of course, then you depend on others. And Cypress is doing that. So Cypress, for example, is using jQuery for the selection mechanism. Yes, jQuery. And it's also using as a testing framework. It has not built its own testing framework, so where you can run expect and have all these matches. But there it falls back, or it uses Mocha, which is one of the three large JavaScript testing frameworks next to Jest and Jasmine, and also Chai, which are the accompanying matcher, which is the accompanying matcher library to Mocha itself. And if you ever want to mock something or stop something, then you can use Sign-on.js. This is this Greek symbol here that you see, but normally in an end-to-end test, we don't need to do that. So there are already some differences when it comes to dependencies. About the differences, about this outside testing of Playwright and the inside testing of Cypress. The thing is, in Cypress we have these kind of limitations. So it is not possible that we can do whatever we want in a Cypress test. For example, we can't just control multiple tabs if we want to. In the past, there also have been difficulties when a test switched between multiple origins. Because if I switch to different origin and I have a test code which is loaded under my origin localhost 4200, then of course the browser, because of security limitations, will not allow to execute that test code coming from another origin. So, and so on and so forth. So there are some other things which didn't really work or which had this kind of limitations from the inside testing. But the thing is, quite often we really don't need this kind of features that Playwright provides with this outside of browser testing. For example, I've mentioned that we can run or control multiple tabs simultaneously. It doesn't happen so often that we have the need for it. For other things, for example, origin switch, Cypress came up with some workarounds so that it's still working in a way. And we also have to say it's not just that testing code is always injected into the browser. Playwright also provides functionalities to kind of send network requests, kind of define scripts which run in the node process and then can be activated via the test. So there are some things where we can achieve quite a lot with Playwright and where we can really go beyond the actual limitations that we would have if it would just be JavaScript which is executed in the browser. So if you hear this argument that we can do way more with Playwright because the test runs outside of the browser, yes, that's right. With Cypress, still we have some workarounds, but in most cases, at least in my experience, and also what I see with our customers, clients, partners, it's not that you really need these kind of features that Playwright provides you in addition. But if you have the need for it, then definitely go with Playwright and don't try to make it work with Cypress. So when it comes to the developer experience, to the productivity, which Cypress is actually known for, then in Cypress we have a central application which is responsible for that, and that's the test runner. Let me quickly open it. It looks like this. So first of all, we need to choose for a certain browser. We see here WebKit, Firefox is supported as well, but I just go with Chrome. Then this is my actual workbench, so to say. I see here a list of all my test files that I have. I select a particular test, and then the screen comes in two different parts. We have in the main screen here, we have our application that we test, and on the left side in the sidebar, we see all the test commands. I can also hover with my mouse over them. Then we see here that with every command which is listed here, Cypress is generating a screenshot. And for every action, in this case, I have clicked on the button, Cypress is actually generating two screenshots. It shows me how the application looked like before and afterwards. The application is fully functional in Cypress, so I can click around here if I want to. It's the application that runs here. And in addition, when I open my console, it's a little bit large now, then with Cypress, I can click on a certain command. In this case, it's the click. And then Cypress gives me some contextual, some detailed information about this particular command that helps me when I want to debug something or find out why something didn't work. Of course, I can also use the normal elements selector so I can see the DOM of my application. Everything is right there. There are some further things in Cypress where I don't want to go too deep, but in general, we can say that the developer experience in Cypress is really superior. It's really great. It's one of the two main things that kind of gave Cypress their #1 position. The first one was the stability, and the second one is the developer experience, what we see right now. When it comes to debugging, it's not so easy with Cypress. That also has something to do with the asynchronous part, which we will discuss later. But what you would have to do, so I'll quickly open my init site here. You need to add a debugger or a breakpoint into your test code. Then of course you can go back. This test is executed, but you see here it stops at the breakpoint, but we don't see here anything in the application. And this is because of the asynchrony or the way how Cypress is dealing with the asynchrony in this case. But normally we have to say that it's not a big deal. We don't really need it. This UI gives us enough information. What about Playwright? Playwright comes in two flavors. The original one was that Playwright, or the support, the developer experience of Playwright, was built directly into VS Code. We need to install an extension, and I have here the same tests. So I have here, for example, my init test, and then in Playwright, I can go to testing. I can also go here if I want to. And Playwright allows me to start the tests directly from the IDE. So the IDE in this case is more or less the UI, the test runner. So I can say here I want to run it, run test. But we'll see that the browser will show up. You can see what's going on. So nice, so good. And we can also debug it. So I can say I want to set a breakpoint here, for example here. And then I say debug. And then I have full access to the complete debugging functionalities of VS Code. So this is quite cool. Quickly, let me also resize it here. And what you have also, you might have already seen it, in VS Code, you also see the time of execution that it took for Playwright. So every line has a number so that you can also see the time. What's really great is the connection between VS Code and the running browser. Playwright's opening the browser for you, you don't need to do that, because you can directly in your code click on a selector, which is what get by test ID is, and you see that it is highlighting automatically the DOM element. And in this case, the selector is a chained one, so it starts actually here with locator row custom, and then we go down to button edit. And I can also click on some other selectors if I want to, for example here to customers. And if I want to, then I can also change it. So I say here holidays, for example, and then it highlights the other element. Of course, if I want that this test is then re-executed, I need to stop it and restart it, but this connection is quite good. It turned out that the integration of the Playwright or the Playwright extension in VS Code was not that good. We quite often in our workshops had some participants where for some reason the extension didn't work and there was no really an error message. Nobody didn't really know what's going on. So they had to work via the CLI, which is of course not something which we want to do. With Cypress you don't have these issues because there is just one UI and it's not integrated. But Playwright reacted a little bit to this situation and they come up with a second thing, which is the UI mode. So what I can do in Playwright is that first of all I can stop my test right now and I can start if I want to via VS Code, or I can also do it via the command line that I just say, okay, I want to, there's my terminal, I want to run Playwright test --UI. And now the test runner opens up. It is very similar what we have in Cypress. So if I click here on init, then the test starts to be executed. I see here in the middle my application. I see all the test commands in the sidebar. I also get here a lot of contextual information if I want to. And here at the very top, I also see the application, how it looked like over time. This is very good. It also has a watcher mode. It also allows me to switch between different browsers. At the moment, for example, I'm running with Firefox and I can say, no, I want to do it with Chromium. That's not an issue. Then it internally is just starting the Chromium instance. In general, if you compare the Playwright UI mode with the Cypress UI mode, we have to say, and this might be a little bit subjective, but when you work for a long time with it, you see that the UI mode is relatively young. It's not there for a very long time. It has some kind of area for improvement, let's put it like this. But at the moment, the Cypress UI mode, the Cypress test runner is better. This is my opinion, what I would say. But of course the question is, or the thing is, Playwright has time to catch up. It's not that old and they will try to improve the UI mode as best as they can. So we'll see what it looks like in 1 year. Let's come to the category of the CI. So what does that mean? It means first of all performance. How long do we have to wait until we get the results from Cypress, from Playwright? And then second, what features do they provide when a test's failing? How can I find out what the error was? In Playwright, we have a so-called trace view. So there is a trace view which Playwright stores and we can take a look at it afterwards. Playwright also supports parallelization and sharding. On Cypress side, Cypress is doing a video recording, so we get an MP4 file, no trace viewer. If the test fails, we're getting a screenshot. For all the tests, even if they succeed, we always get a video recording. And in terms of parallelization or sharding, Cypress doesn't provide this feature out of the box for free. The tests are executed in sequential order, but Cypress provides a commercial product, which is the Cypress Cloud, that can do a parallelization. Sharding, what does that mean? Sharding means that you can run multiple machines at once, and then you say you are machine number 1 of 3, you're 2 of 3, 3 of 3, and then they will split up the tests among them, so you get a parallelization between physical machines as well. Let's take a look. Let's start with Cypress. How does it look like when it runs in the CI? So with Cypress, let me remove the debugger here. With Cypress, we have here this end-to-end watch. So depending what you use, in my case, I use NX. If you use just Cypress, then just say Cypress run. NX here is calling Cypress run under the hoods. But I just say end-to-end. It says keep serves, keep NX cache, that's all right. And we see now that by default, no browser opens, that's the CI mode. Electron is used, which is the built-in browser, which is of course also Chromium, but Cypress comes with it. And then it is doing a video recording, and it is also then giving us a final output where we see the results and the time that it took. Wait a little bit, and at the moment we can say it took 27 seconds about. We also see here that the init, for example, that it took only 2 seconds. And well, the videos are available, again, depending on the way how you use Cypress. And we have here a dist folder, and here we have the videos. And if I want to see this init, which took me 2 seconds, then I can just open it in my Finder and click on it. Yep. And this is what I see. Yep. So I can then control the time a little bit, but this is the video recording. And if a test fails, let me try that one as well. So I go back to the init and I force here a failure. So I say here Latizia. And if I then rerun it, then we will see that we are getting a screenshot. So this will now take a little bit longer because Cypress has this retryability built in, so it doesn't fail immediately. But in this case, it's waiting for 4 seconds until this Latizia DOM element appears, which doesn't happen, hopefully. Otherwise, the test would be a little bit strange. But we will see then a screenshot which comes up. Just about seconds. Yeah, there we have an error message, and we have here our screenshot. So this is what you get at the end, and then you can hopefully understand why the test failed. But this is what you get, the videos and also the screenshot. I mentioned before that there is also something which is the Cypress Cloud. Let me quickly open that one. Again, this is something that where you have to pay for. I mean, of course, there is some free time, but this is just the dashboard. So you get here way more information about your tests, how they worked and all that stuff. And it would also be possible to run them in parallel. Let's now come to Playwright. Let's start maybe with the speed criteria. Let me quickly fix the test so that it is the Latizia. In Playwright, if we remember correctly, the init test took around 2 seconds. Let me now run it with Playwright. So I say here Playwright test, and then I just define the file init. And we see Playwright took 4 seconds and not 2. But Playwright executed these tests with 3 browsers. This is something you can configure, but by default, Playwright runs 3 browsers for every test. If I want to limit it, I can say project Chromium, this case, that's the browser where I say I only want to run Chromium, but we see already it doesn't become that much faster. So it's now 3 seconds. It's slower than the Cypress test. You might have heard already that Playwright is more performant than Cypress. We see here that this might not be that true, but the reason is the parallelization. With Playwright, you might have seen it already before. Here it says I'm using 3 workers. So Playwright automatically starts multiple worker processes, and we can, depending on the hardware that we have, this is where the performance improvement of Playwright comes from. So for example, I could say, okay, I want to run all these tests that I have, and maybe I want to use 10 workers if I actually have the amount to do that, and then in the hardware, and if I'm able to type it in correctly. And then we will see that the tests, of course, are obviously way faster because they are all parallelized. WebKit takes always a little bit longer, but we see 12.0 seconds, and the more tests I have, the better Playwright becomes in this. There is also something else in Playwright which is called the fully parallel mode. So if you have multiple tests in a single file, then by default, Playwright is able to execute also those tests in parallel mode. So you have to be careful that you don't have a dependency between them, even if they are part of the same suite. They should all be independent from each other. This gives you most out of the performance that Playwright has to offer. The other thing is about the debugging feature. So how can we find out in Playwright if something went wrong, what actually was the root cause? Let me do the same thing that I've done before. So we have here our change to Laetitia, and let me just say, I say here, instead of Laetitia should pop up, where we know already that this will fail. So I say, okay, please run it. Playwright has also this auto waiting built in, so it will take a little bit longer because it gives the application time enough that this Laetitia might show up in the DOM in case the network is slow or some other things. But in the end, the test fails. And here we see the trace view. This is the Playwright version of a video and a screenshot that Cypress provides us. If I click on Trace Viewer, I have here all my testing commands. It's interactive. I can hover over them with my mouse. I'm getting all the contextual information, and I also have here this kind of slideshow of my application. And this is stored for you. You can just pick it up. You have also here a pick locator where you can even also interactively communicate or try some things out with your application. So if something happens, this is the tool that you want to have. So again, in the criteria or in the category of CI when it comes to performance and finding out the root causes of your failed tests, then we have to say that Playwright is the better one. Now let's come to the coding part. So how does it feel like when we write tests in Cypress or in Playwright? Playwright, I've already mentioned it in the technological approach, has this mentality of we build everything on our own. So when it comes to selecting things, when it comes to assertions, Playwright has everything built in. It has its own commands, its own assertions, its own selectors. When we select elements, we don't pass them on to an action. We don't pass on the direct DOM element to the action. The selectors or the locators, how they are called in Playwright, they are an abstraction to the DOM. So we will never have direct access to the DOM itself. This is very important. Why? Because when our application under test re-renders a particular DOM element, then it's important that the test doesn't fail, and Playwright will pick this up and will then re-query our DOM because it knows of course the selection criteria or the query criteria and will find the new rendered one. This is one of the main pain points when it comes to flakiness, and Playwright has done a very good job here. When it comes to asynchrony, Playwright is using async await, so we are in full control of the asynchrony. We need to await our actions, our methods, because otherwise they aren't executed. With Cypress, on the other hand, it's a completely different picture. Cypress depends on third-party libraries. So as I said before, it's using jQuery to select DOM elements. which means we have all the we have all the power that jQuery actually provides available in Cypress as well. When it comes to assertions, there is this Mocha framework with the Chai library, and they provide matchers which are specialized for DOM tests. Let's put it like this. We will see this, that it looks a little bit strange because of that, because when we want to run a matcher, we don't execute a command, but we provide a string, and internally Cypress maps it to the right Chai matcher. There is also in Cypress a possibility for explicit assertions, which means it gives us the possibility to define callback functions where we have direct access to the DOM elements and can then, well, write our own custom logic, custom matcher logic if we want. This is a really powerful feature of Cypress. In Cypress, we have a new concept since version 12, which is called the retriability. This means that we can chain multiple selectors together, and the complete chain will be repeated until the last element returns the success message or returns the element or says, I have found the element. The same is also working in Playwright. It provides the same feature, but there is a catch, which I will show you in a minute or even earlier. And then in Cypress, we also have, when it comes to asynchrony, we have a very, I call it declarative asynchrony, which is a word that I made up, but it's very special in Cypress. Let's take a look at the main commands, how it looks like in Cypress and in Playwright. So selecting, doing an action, and also asserting something. So I'm going to create a new file. I say basic site yes. It should click on a menu item, and then comes the actual test function. So Cypress has something built in, which is called visit, that opens our page. Normally Cypress knows about the URL, so we don't have to pass it here. And then I just say, I want to select an A tag that contains the name customers, so I can chain it as you see it here. And then I just want to click on it. So a very simple one. When we now want to execute this test, or when we see what this one is doing, then I need to call the right spec. So it's here basic. And we see it's working, right? And now come the difficulties, I would say, because there are some rules with this chainability. So we see everything's working, but if I, for example, would say now, I want to add an assertion. So when I select an A tag, I want to verify that I'm only selecting those A tags that have an href attribute. So I say here, I can do this in Cypress. I can say should have attribute, and that's the href. And once you have found them, then please continue to select for that one that contains the name customers. Let's see how it works. It might fail. And this is really confusing. We see that Cypress, that the test is failing. We can retry it again. It will again fail. And as I said before, there are some rules. And the rules say, if you chain multiple queries together, then all of them will be retried. But if you mix in or add an assertion right in the middle of the chain, then you break it. And once the chain is broken, it will not repeat it as a whole. So what we see here is that what we have actually done is that I said, I want to search for an A tag, which should have that attribute href. And once the assertion here is returning true, the get for A is not repeated anymore. Instead, Cypress says, okay, I'm keeping the reference to the A tag and I'm waiting until the A tag changes its name or its label, its text to customers, and then I click on it. And it's confusing because Cypress keeps telling us, hey, look, I can find an A tag, but I don't find a tag that contains the text customers, although we see that it is right there in front of us. But if we hover with our mouse over it, then we see what's going on. Cypress said, I found an A tag. it has an href attribute. This is an assertion, so I stop right now. I store the reference for the a tag, and now I am waiting that this link, the unforgettable holiday link, changes its text to customers, which will never happen. And the confusing part is that we see already that the page loaded further and that the customer's menu item appeared, but it will never be picked up by Cypress. That's because of the rules that we have to know. So if we are aware of them, of this retriability and its constraints, then of course we know what to do. But if we don't know what's going on here, then it might take a very long time to find out the problem. In addition, what might be even worse, that we can have a race condition here. Because in this case, our application waits until it receives from the endpoint if we are dealing here with a signed in user or not. And only then does it start to render the menu items. So if you have a development environment where you're writing your tests and you have maybe mocked your authorization server that returns the answer immediately, then the menu items will be shown immediately. So the first get A will cover them as well, and then the test will work. But in the CI, where the real authentication server runs, it might take a little bit longer, and then you have the same situation as we have right now, that the test doesn't fail, and then it really looks like a flaky test, although it's a bug that we have written because we were not aware of the specific rules of the retriability. How does it work in Playwright? Playwright has a design that exactly this situation cannot happen. In Playwright, we can only chain locators together, queries, but once we have an assertion, it stops. We can't add anything else to an assertion, and the same is also true for an action. So let's take a look at Playwright. So I say here, I have a new test. I call it basic spec yes. It's doing the same thing. I have here test, important. The test command comes from Playwright. I say, should click on the button. We are working here directly with asynchronous, so this is something you haven't seen before. There was no async await, it just worked magically. Then we have the same visit pendant in Playwright is page go to. It also has a setting for the base URL, so we just need to provide here an empty string. Yeah, and then if I want to select something, then I need to say, okay, await page locator, for example, that's the basic one. I can say a tag, this is what I want to have. And then maybe I can say, okay, there should be an href tag, and I also want to have a text. So has text in this case. And I say here customers. And I want to click on that one. We can also chain it here together, so I could provide here another locator if I want to, or I can also do a filter if I want to, but we will see in a minute that when Playwright shows this to us in the browser, that is already showing the chain how it really is. Then we see that the filter is actually working. Let me quickly start the browser here. Right, so when I say here, this is the href tag, then you see here the highlight in the browser says it's a locator method followed by a filter has text. And the thing is, here I have an action. When I have executed my action, I can't continue anymore. I can't say, okay, and now I want to search for something else. That's not going to work. When it comes to assertion, it's the same thing. So I don't have the possibility here to come up with a should. An assertion needs to be done in a different way. In Playwright, an assertion goes with an expect. So I need to start a new line. Playwright forces me to do this by its design, and it says you need to place your locator inside of the expect, href, that's an await, and then you have a matcher to be visible if I want to. And the expect also needs to be imported. Here again, we see that the expect also comes from Playwright itself. This was a little bit too much, and now I say to be visible, for example. And again, I can't click here on something. That's it. As soon as I provide a matcher, it's over. I can't continue anymore. I need to start with a new line. So again, both are quite good, both approaches. Playwright has a more of a safer design. Playwright, maybe because of Cypress, because of historical reasons, provides you with this chainability where you have to know what you are doing. Let's come to the asynchronous part, to the special part. In Cypress, when we say CyVisit, CyGet, CyClick, or something with Cy, then it looks like that these commands are executed. Let me quickly jump to the code. So when I say here CyVisit, CyGet, then we think it's executed. But we know that this might be a problem because there is no async await in place. So it looks like they are synchronous commands. But when the JavaScript is executed in the browser, and this is a synchronous command, then it's blocking everything and the actual application can't do anything. So it can't be synchronous. So what Cypress is doing, that every command that we execute here is not doing the visit or the get, but it is generating an internal execution plan. So Cypress is really creating an execution plan step by step. And once the test is finished, because all these commands are executed synchronously, but once the synchronous execution stopped, Cypress internally starts with the actual execution of these commands, but then in an asynchronous way. So it might look, in Cypress, it looks very nicely, it's very easy to read, because we don't have here an async await. But the problem again is, if you run into edge cases, it is a problem, it's hard to debug. And I have also prepared an example for that. So this is the holidays site, yes. What we see here is that we are connecting to our backend. So we are requesting here the amount of holidays, and we are storing the response, we say here response body length, and we are storing into the holidays count. So this means, let me quickly show you. These are these holidays, so we are getting here 9 different holiday cards. So I have number 9 stored in my holidays count. Then I open the menu, something which this open menu is a command, customized one, we'll talk about it later. And then we see here the final command where we say we are counting the holiday cards, and what we have here is a so-called explicit assertion, because here we have this callback function where inside of it we say all the elements that we have received, verify that they have a length depending on 9 or what the holidays count, what value it has. By the way, you see here IntelliJ is highlighting the cards, the type of cards, that's a jQuery element. So this is what I meant before, that Cypress is passing on direct the DOM element to its assertion. So we have here direct access to the DOM elements. We're in the middle of our application. What you could do now in this case is that you can say, okay, there is a better way on how to do it. We can use an implicit assertion. So instead of saying should and then a function, I just want to say should have length. That's the matcher. Again, this comes as a string. Internally, it's mapped to a chai matcher. And then I just say the holidays count. Yeah. And if I think I'm safe now, let me show you that we are more or less the opposite. So I say here holidays. Because now it's telling us to have a length of 0, but I got 9. So Cypress thinks that in a way we wanted to have 0 elements, although we know that this is not true, because the holidays count, I can assure you that, that the holidays count here has the number 9. But the question is, I mean, it worked before, but the question is, what's going on right now? We can retry it, and then I'll tell you what's going on. The thing is, the execution plan. At the time when we say CyGet and should, at this time, the response didn't happen yet, but Cypress takes these commands, stores it internally into its execution plan, and then of course it also takes a look at the value of the holidays count at this time when nothing happened yet. And then of course the holidays count has the value 0. But if I go with an explicit assertion, then this function is executed when the holidays count are already there, so when during the asynchronous execution phase. It's not part of generating the execution plan anymore. And then it's working because at this time holidays count has already the number 9. And again, this is something when you know it, there's no problem with it. There are also other ways how you can fix it. You can nest these commands into your Cy request, but especially if you start out with Cypress, this can be very frustrating. Let's put it like this. It can be very frustrating because it will take an awful amount of time to find out what's going on. Why is this test not working? So we have the beauty of not having to deal with asynchrony, but on the other side, when it comes to edge cases, it's really a pain. Playwright is more or less straightforward in that regard. So when we take a look at these tests in Playwright, then we see that we have our awaits in place. So Playwright awaits. We know when the holidays count is set. There is no hidden execution plan, or actually we are controlling the execution plan, and we don't have any issues. So this test is just working as it stands here. Nothing to say about it. But we have our awaits more or less everywhere. Now let's come to the architecture and extensibility. So as soon as we have a lot of tests, of course we don't want to repeat ourselves all the time. For example, in our application, we have this menu item where we already know we need to click on customers or on holidays or on newsletter. We don't want to have the selector in every test. So we want to extract it into a central place where it's stored, and once the selector needs to be changed, then we know we only need to change it once and our tests will continue to work. How can we do that? Playwright recommends in this case page objects. So what we say is that we are generating so-called classes that kind of contain the actions but also the selectors of all the elements, and our tests are just accessing those classes. Cypress on the other side says you can also do page objects, but the better approach is if you extend the Cy object itself, so if you add new methods to the Cy object. But there is of course a catch with the query, which we'll come to later. Let's start with Playwright first. So let's say we have the side menu and I want to create a page object for the side menu. How does this look like in Playwright? In Playwright, it's actually very easy. So I have here my page object. It's a normal class. In this case, it has a constructor, private page. So the test needs to provide the page to the page object. And then it's just executing here the selector, and it's also already clicking on it. So it's not just selecting element, it is also doing the action. How can the test now pass on the page? Well, normally the test would have to instantiate the side menu page, but this is not an optimal solution. And for that, there is a bridging functionality, which is called the test fixtures. So what you can do is that you create another file. You create an interface. In this case, I say it's the side menu fixtures. I say this is an interface which has one property, namely the side menu page. And then I provide here a function where it is doing some kind of setup functionality. So I'm instantiating here the side menu page. And this means that Playwright now here is providing me the page object so that the test doesn't have to do it. So you can also see the test fixtures in that sense without going too deep, as a kind of a dependency injection for your tests. Because from the test's perspective, it goes like this. You need to extend the test object on your own. So I say here, I am importing the test object, but I'm importing it as base because I want to add new features to it, namely those fixtures that I have just implemented. So I say here base extend, then I get a better test object. And with that, all my tests, let me scroll down, have now access in their function to the side menu page, customers page, whatever page objects or whatever those fixtures provide to you. And then the test, of course, doesn't need to instantiate it, but just gets already the instance as it is from Playwright itself. Maybe that was a little bit too much, but again, it's not a deep dive. We have a workshop for that, but it should be enough just to give you an understanding how it works in Playwright. So you combine test fixtures in the page objects. In Cypress, it's different. In Cypress, you can also go with page objects. You will not have test fixtures or you have to write them on your own. But the recommended approach in Cypress is that you extend the Cy object. So for that, we have the support, not here. We have here a commands because you have to do this in 2 steps. You extend the interface of the Cy object, in this case, that's the chainable. And for example, you say here you have a new method which is called the open menu. It awaits a union type for item and, well, it opens, then it clicks on the menu item. This is the first step to make it type safe. The second step is the implementation. So I have here my add, Cypress commands add, where I say open menu, then I provide the implementation, and you see here I'm doing nothing else than just internally calling the Cy object on my own. But from a tests perspective, if I go to, where did we have it before? I think it was in customers, was it? No, oh, it's right in front of here. In my test, I can then just say, okay, I have a Cy, now there is a new method, open menu, and then I can say customers, holidays, or whatever it more or less provides. So you end up with quite a lot of methods that the Cy object then provides, which I don't find very nice, but that's the recommended approach of Cypress. There's one thing, starting with Cypress 12, which makes it a little bit harder, and that's the query, or the retry, coming from the retryability, from this chain that I have already explained. If you create a command, then Cypress needs to know if this is a query, so if it is chainable or not. And if it's a query, you need to say add query. This is the sign for Cypress that it's now a query. Now the thing for a query, or the criteria for a command to be a query, is that the implementation needs to be a synchronous function. So the query is not allowed to add any command to the internal execution plan. It just is executed, it's a pure function. No asynchrony, nothing, it just returns the element or nothing. And because of that, there is now a new function in Cypress, the CyNow, where I can say, I want to execute CyGet with these arguments, but I don't want to add it to the execution plan, but I want to execute it only once. So I want to actually have access to the internal function of the CyGet. This is what CyNow provides you, the internal, the synchronous functions. And then you use that one, in this case it's getFn, so I don't have to do here not that much, but I then just return a function which is then internally calling the synchronous function of CyGet. Is a little bit more complicated than it is with the other commands. It actually also works if you don't stick to it, so you could also say you just add the test ID as a normal command if you want to. But there are some edge cases again where you need to rely that Cypress deals or handles this custom command as a query, and then you have to be very careful. You have to pay attention to do it in the right way. So in the last category where we take a look at are the miscellaneous features. Actually, there's not so much to say. That's just more or less the same, regardless what you take. When it comes, for example, to networking, both frameworks provide you with possibilities to manipulate the network, so you can mock or you can stop it. You can also verify that a particular network request was sent by your application. You can also catch the response and again run assertions to it. And both frameworks also provide you to kind of start an HTTP communication out from the test. Visual regression. Playwright built in Cypress, different approach. Cypress has a lot of partners, cloud services to provide visual regression. What this is all about, visual regression means you are creating a screenshot, a rendered in a JPEG or a PNG of a particular component or of the complete web page. And with every test run, a new screenshot is taken and it is compared with the reference one. And if it doesn't match, then the test's failing. So there are some cloud services that provide you services for that. In Cypress, we have extensions for them. Maybe it also exists in Playwright, but in Cypress, we don't have a built-in functionality out of the box for visual regression. There is a community project as well, which is already unmaintained for 2 years, which is not very good. But again, this is what I've mentioned in the beginning. With Cypress, you're relying on third-party libraries, and if they stop their support, then you don't have more or less the option available. Accessibility, very interesting. There is this testing library that provides dedicated selectors for accessibility, so you can select via the role or via label or some other criteria. For Cypress, we have the testing library. There is a testing library for Cypress. So all the commands that we know from the testing library can be reused in Cypress as well. We just need to install the extension and it just works. Playwright went the other way. Playwright said, okay, we know that more or less every framework out there is using the testing library, but we don't want to do it. It's not because we don't think it's a good thing, but we want to build everything on our own. So what Playwright did is that they re-implemented the selectors of the testing library in a way on their own. So you have, both frameworks provide the same user-facing selectors, but again, Playwright provides it out of the box. In Cypress, you need to install an extension. Talking of extensions, for both, the X plugin is available as extension. Playwright doesn't have that one built in. When it comes to recording, so when you say you have a non-technical person, a tester, and you say to them, hey, just click or just do your test that you do all the time, and I want to record it so that I can implement it later on. Playwright has something built in, but what I would recommend, just go with the existing Chrome extensions. So what we have in Chrome, we have here this recorder feature in the DevTools. So by all means, use that one. So you can say here recorder. I click on localhost 4200, and then I say here I want to create a new recording. Then I click on record. Then I click on some buttons, whatever I want to do. Yeah. So I'm doing my stuff here, saying save, yeah, wonderful. And then once I'm done with my manual test, I say end recording. And what we have now, that there is a show code button in the recorder of Chromium. And by default, it prints you JSON or something for Puppeteer. But you have extensions, Chromium extensions. So we see that now in my Chromium, in my DevTools, there is now the Playwright test. It is generated, and we also have something for Cypress, but you need to install the extensions. You shouldn't copy this one by one. This is more or less, you should see the generated code here as some kind of a template that you can copy, but then of course you need to implement it in the right way. So in Cypress, you will then basically replace all these commands with your Cypress commands, with your customized ones that you have created. And in Playwright, of course, we have our page objects with the fixtures, so you will apply them. Last thing, session storage. So when we have an application where we are dealing with signed-in users, it's of course obvious that we don't want to sign in a user with every test. That will occupy too much time. And both frameworks provide you with caching functionalities. So once you have a signed-in user, so you need to do it once, you can say you want to store the cookies, the local storage, the session storage. You want to store it in a cache and reuse it in another test. Both are providing you with opportunities to do that, so there's nothing else to say about it. All right, summary. Before I start, quick advertising. So we provide workshops for Cypress and also for Playwright. 2 workshops are already upcoming very soon, depending on the time that you watch the video. So if you are too late, then please check out our website. You will find there the current dates. Well, and now between Playwright and Cypress. So if you allow me the comparison to Formula One, then I would say Cypress was the leading car for many rounds. It had quite a comfortable position, but it needs to pick up pace because Playwright is coming after it quite fast. First criteria, first factor that speaks for Playwright is the performance. We saw that Cypress tests, they are fast as well, but they run in sequential order, whereas Playwright provides parallelization out of the box. It's not that Cypress can't do it, but they decided to put this in their commercial product into Cypress Cloud, and they are not providing this feature for free. Next thing, more control over the browser. Again, Playwright tests run outside of the browser. We can do whatever we want with the browser. With Cypress, we are limited. The question still though is, do we actually have the need for these kind of additional control that Playwright provides us? Then, trace viewer. When an error happens and we want to know what went wrong, then the trace viewer in Playwright is superior. There is nothing else to say about it. It's just better. And what you also shouldn't forget about Playwright is that it's backed up by Microsoft. So we know Microsoft is a huge company. They will definitely not see Playwright, at least in my opinion, as their critical product where they need to earn money quite quickly. I think Microsoft has other sources of income and they can afford to kind of give away Playwright for free for quite some time. We also have to say that Playwright had quite a comfortable position. They had the time to take the good parts of Cypress, improve them, and those parts which were not so good in Cypress, they just didn't use it at all and came up with a better alternative. So what good things are there about Cypress? When it comes to the developer experience, then the test run of Cypress is so good. It gives us so much in terms of productivity that it's more or less, in my opinion, it's unbeatable at the moment. But we also have to admit that the Playwright UI mode is catching up quite quickly. But if I would have to pick right now a framework just because of its developer experience, then it would be Cypress. Then Cypress is also very mature and it's the dominating framework. These are factors that you shouldn't underestimate. If you are the dominator for a very long time and you have a stable framework, then you have many developers available that can work with Cypress. You don't have to expect so many breaking changes anymore because it's stable, it had the time to mature. There are many videos, blog articles, you will find help on Stack Overflow or wherever you look. That is really something which, again, you should not underestimate. That speaks for Cypress. And last but not least, component testing, especially if you're an Angular developer, then it's crystal clear. If you want to do component testing, serious component testing, then there is no way around Cypress. Playwright also provides component testing, but not for Angular. They provide it for Vue, React, but in an experimental mode. Cypress provides component testing for these frameworks as well, but they are already in a stable version, and the same is also true for Angular. All right, so that's it. We will see what the future will bring. I think we are in a good position at the moment because what we know is that Cypress has a real competitor and we know that competition is good for innovation. I hope that I was able to give you enough information to make a good decision for your own project. If you have any questions, please add them to the comments. And also let me know if you agree, if you disagree, if you maybe found some other criteria where you say, okay, in this area, Playwright or Cypress is much better. Also, if you use a completely different framework and you say, why didn't I mention that? That's way much better than Playwright and Cypress, then absolutely let me know as well. And other than that, if you liked the video, please give it a like. Also subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching and goodbye.